Hey, Digging for Kryptonite YouTube audience. It's your host, Anthony Desiato, here with a quick message before we get into this week's all-new installment. First and foremost, whether you are a regular viewer of the podcast on YouTube or you just stumbled across this episode, thank you very much for checking it out. I wanted to let you know that in March 2022, I will be ending the video versions of the podcast. The podcast itself is not going anywhere. However, it will continue exclusively as an audio-only podcast. Previously, I've been putting out both versions of the show, but beginning in March 2022, it will only be available in audio form. So what that means is, if you are not currently subscribed to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey via one of the audio podcast platforms, please make sure you subscribe. I'm putting out this notice as early as possible to prep people and give everyone enough notice so that if they're not on one of those audio podcast platforms, they have an opportunity to do so. The show is available on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. So please, if you're not currently subscribed, please make sure you go and take care of that. Please keep your subscription to the Anthony Desiato YouTube channel. I will continue to utilize the channel for a variety of different types of videos, but it simply won't be the full video edition of the podcast. And there were a number of factors that went into that decision. But at the end of the day, I felt that it was most effective for me to really focus my time and resources and energies into the traditional classic audio version of the podcast. That being said, I really had a great time creating these video versions of the show. And the majority of the audience seemed to consume the show via the audio platforms. But for anyone who regularly watched these shows, or maybe just watched a few minutes here and there, whatever the case may be, thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate it. And my understanding is that at least some of you discovered the show through YouTube. So thank you so much to the YouTube audience. And I'm so proud of the library of video podcasts that will remain on the Anthony Desiato YouTube channel. And my sincere hope is that other people will continue to find Digging for Kryptonite and then come join us on the audio side. So again, March 2022 will mark the end of the video versions of Digging for Kryptonite. If you're not currently subscribed via Apple Podcasts or any of the other platforms, please make sure you subscribe. Thank you for all of the support, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. Joining me for part 2 of the animated mixtapes is returning guest, Jeremy Frutkin. Welcome back.
You know, Anthony, I almost want to introduce myself as your pal, Jeremy Frutkin, for the sake of this episode. You know, I was like, was it too much? I kind of threw it out there anyway. But Anthony, I'm so excited, as you can tell, to not only be here, but to talk today about one of my favorite animated shows of all time, and what I personally believe to be one of the greatest supporting casts in all of comic books and their adaptive media.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, this is our Metropolis episode. So again, we are taking this mixtape approach. Last time we dealt with Krypton, Brainiac, the Phantom Zone villains. This time, like I said, we are focusing on Metropolis and the supporting cast. And just to let people know specifically which episodes we will be covering for this installment, we will be talking about The Last Son of Krypton Part 3, so that's the conclusion of that 3-part series premiere, A Little Piece of Home, which introduced Kryptonite to the series, The Way of All Flesh, where Lex creates Mcdowell, My Girl, where we meet an adult Lana Lang on the arm of Lex Luthor, of all people.
Gasp.
Brave New Metropolis, where Lois finds herself in an alternate reality where Superman has become an authoritarian figure. A bit of a forerunner to Injustice. I think we'll have an interesting chat on that front.
We're like this, my friend. As always, we're like this. That's right.
Target, where Lois Lane is targeted by a mystery assailant. The Late Mr. Kent, which is one of my very favorite episodes of the entire series. And that's another one I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And bringing this full circle to what you were just saying a moment ago, Superman's Pal, the Jimmy Olsen spotlight episode from towards the end of the run. So that's what we'll be talking about for Volume 2 of the animated mixtapes.
It's an exciting run of episodes. This has been I feel like I'm going to say at the start of every episode that we do, but this has been such an enjoyable collection and mixtape of episodes.
also, and I don't want to sound like a broken record with this, but I really feel like this way of rewatching, there's a lot to be said for it, because just in this run of episodes alone, we meet Detective Bowman, the corrupt police officer,
Yes. Yes.
in the Target episode. And then, of course, he comes back and plays a big role in The Late Mr. Kent. Again, we meet adult Lana Lang in My Girl, and then she
Yep.
proves to be very clutch in The Late Mr. Kent in allowing Clark
Yes.
to return to the land of the living.
What
So,
a nice surprise that was. Pretty cool.
yeah. So it's like, if you were just watching or rewatching the animated series, in its original order, it's fine. I think, you would still get the ultimate effect, but it really packs more of a punch watching it this way. Did you find that as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's like you're watching a condensed, like hyper focused version of these themes and these characters. So instead of having, and again, the Timverse is just the masters, the absolute masters of animated long form storytelling. But there's so much that happens in between. We're kind of just putting those links together, like you just said, with Lana Lang, with Detective Bowman. We're seeing all of these characters pop up again and seeing their arcs unfold and how they affect Metropolis and Superman himself.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Now, just like last time, we started with some big picture ideas about the series. There were a couple of things we didn't talk about last time that I would love to touch on now, and I think they're just as appropriate, if not more so, for this episode. So one of the things is, and I don't believe we hit on this last time, unless I completely blanked, the opening sequence of the series that we see at the beginning of every episode. I love it more than I can put into words. I think it's such a terrific encapsulation, certainly of this animated series, but also just of Superman generally. And, one of the things that really stood out to me, especially now having spent time over the past, year and a half, going through so much of what came before, it is, to my knowledge, the first live action or animated series featuring Superman without an opening narration. They didn't need to explain anything about the character, and I think that speaks to probably like two things. One, again, the character now has been around for decades, so maybe it's
Yep.
not needed, but also the imagery is just so striking in that opening sequence, and it just taps into that iconography of the Superman mythology, that exploding planet and the rocket, the Kent's finding, like all of it is right there. They tell the story with the visuals. I love it so much.
Every time. So I'm watching. I know you have those beautiful Blu-rays. I'm watching as a peasant on HBO Max is what I'm doing, But every time I'm watching them, it gives me the option, skip intro. And let me tell you, I have never hit that button, not once. Because, and this is going to sound like blasphemy, obviously the John Williams Superman score is top marks. I would tie this. I almost was willing to say that this is my absolute favorite, but I would put them as 1A and 1B for this music. And I think that music combined with the iconography and the art style, you're right. It's even if you weren't the biggest Superman fan, and let's be honest here, I'd say that you'd probably have a hard time finding anybody in the world, or at least in most parts of the world, who wouldn't at least have some kind of passing familiarity of who Superman is, right? I mean, he's one of the largest cultural figures in our global mythos. You get everything you need without a narration. And, that's a tremendous point as well. I'd be really curious to see if this is, in fact, the only intro that we have without a narration, at least from an animated standpoint. I mean, I think you really hit a nail on the head. We actually just discussed via messages before too. There's a new animated series coming out next year, or this year now, as we record this, I should say, with Jack Quaid, who's awesome, by the way. I don't know if you guys are familiar. He's a phenomenal actor. I'm really curious now to see in that intro what they do with that. And this conversation has kind of informed my forward thinking as I messaged you with that. But it's really, I think you really hit the nail on the head, because at this point in the 90s, that Superman had already been around for 50 years, right? Give or take.
60, yeah.
60,
60.
there you go. 60 years. So, I mean, people knew already what they were getting into, and I love that. It's my same feeling of I don't want to see Batman's parents get killed in the alley again and again and again. I don't want to see Aunt May mourn the death of Uncle Ben with Peter again and again and again. We get the Krypton stuff, as we talked about, which is great. We're there, and it's interesting, but I just like that this intro You just feel it, you experience it. The music is just stellar. Everybody should pause this recording right now and take that minute, might even be a full minute, and just listen to that theme song and tell me that it does not get you hyped, because it's chef's kiss. So good. So good. But yeah, tremendous point about no narration, and that they really show you everything you need to know.
Yeah. And, look, like yourself, I love that iconic John Williams score. I mean, that's in the all-time, Hall of Fame.
Can't
But,
argue that.
this has come up in the show before, when Ken Marion and I have discussed the Zack Snyder movies. I mean, that Hans Zimmer score for Man of Steel, when Clark takes flight for the first time, I mean, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. That's why, and I'm going to spend more time on the Richard Donner Superman later on this year. And it's like, as much as I love it and I have great appreciation for it, and I understand why it means so much to people, there's room for other interpretations. And I think sometimes I feel some frustration as a fan when it feels like others are so whether it's creators or fans, are so beholden to that one version that it's preventing other iterations from really having the space that they need. And so, and look, like when we talked about the Ruby Spears cartoon, that did utilize a rearranged version of the John Williams score. That was really cool. But I think it would have been a real shame if they had done something similar for this, because we would have missed out on a unique, distinct piece of music for Superman.
And a beautiful one. Yeah, that's the thing with any type of fandom. And it's so hard when you're so passionate about a particular medium or even a character in their universe. It's got to be the old improv rule, right? It has to be yes and. You got to make room for other interpretations, because that's how you get new, beautiful expansions and versions. And it's how and why these properties grow with us over the years and decades.
Yeah, totally. And so that was one piece that I wanted to touch on. Another is, I know we talked about the general style of the show, of course, the classic Bruce Timm art style, but also how it took its influence from the Fleischer cartoons. I don't know that we spoke really specifically, though, about the look of Metropolis itself, and specifically how they differentiated it from Gotham in the companion Batman series that was running at the same time. And I've watched, I don't know, maybe you have too, like on the old DVDs, they have the, behind the scenes features and things like that, where the Bruce Timm and the other producers talked about how they really went for that, that Art Deco look for Metropolis. So the very, symmetrical geometric shapes, but also how, again, to differentiate it from Gotham, they really aimed for a more futuristic vibe. So it was, again, those elevated railways and elevated highways, and the cars, it wasn't like out of the Jetsons, but, they were definitely, looked more futuristic than, Batman, for example. But do you like the art style generally for the way the city and its, inhabitants are rendered?
I do. I absolutely love it. It's retro futuristic, right? It's combining all of those classic elements of Superman by also this kind of like futuristic, more modern, postmodern, even beyond modern take. And that's also in a way kind of such a beautiful love letter to Superman and Metropolis, right? Because it very much is both of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around so much for so long that it has existed in so many different decades and eras and changes that, in a way, it is kind of honoring the past, the present, and the future of Superman and Metropolis.
Now, another thing that I wanted to ask you, and I think you're going to know where I'm going as soon as I start to start to get this, because I know you're a video game guy.
I am. I'm what the kids call elite gamer 1337. Mountain Dew, what up? I'm sorry. I'll leave now. Anyway,
I don't know what any of that means, but that's fine. I've talked on the show before, as a kid, I played Super Nintendo and PlayStation, and then that was about it. But, as a kid, I played and loved the Death and Return of Superman game on Super Nintendo.
Super Nintendo. Yep.
But there were also games that utilized the same art style as Superman the Animated Series, including what's not the official title, but is commonly referred to as Superman 64, which based on my research, is largely considered the worst. Are you familiar with this?
Every time you say Superman 64 out loud, DC should be like obligated to pay a royalty to everybody who purchased that game, including myself back in the day. Oh boy, yes. So coming out for the Nintendo 64, which is a beloved system, especially for people of our age. And I could go on and on about the Nintendo 64, but this is not the Nintendo 64 podcast. This is the Superman podcast. That game was broken, is the best way I could describe it. The game charged you with broken mechanics and basically flying through rings as like a skill around Metropolis. It was bowling shoe ugly to look at. It controlled like you were trying to fly a paper airplane that had lead weights attached to it. The physics were just all completely wonky. It is it's gotten better in our modern era, but from the 80s to the 90s, there was such a licensing craze where companies would get together and be like, I don't even necessarily care what the game is, but this movie or this comic is hot right now. Let's put these out. Now, before I get absolutely roasted in the comments, yes, there are plenty of good licensed games. There are a few good Batman games as well, too. I believe the Batman Returns game was actually pretty good and held up pretty well. So results vary, but I do know that a lot of these licensed properties, especially some of the notorious developers like Ocean from back in the day, would put these games out, and it would just be, oh boy, they did not put the care and love that was needed into a property like that. We're still patiently waiting for a good Superman video game. Everybody up and down thought that the makers of the Batman Arkham games, right? Rocksteady and all of them and all those very, very talented people were going to make a Superman game next. They haven't. Superman is the villain in the new upcoming Suicide Squad. That doesn't count. You know, they're all taken over by. I don't know if they came out and say that it was Starro, but if it's not Starro, it definitely was very heavily influenced by the last movie. The Justice League is in there. They're corrupt and evil. We're still waiting on a good single player Superman game. And I hope we get it because that game is up there in infamy with one of the most, not only one of the worst games of all time, but the biggest disappointments, if that makes sense. I mean, just to take a property like that, especially when, you know, the show is out and it's hot and people of all ages, I'm assuming, are getting into it, to just put this absolute clunker out is just, I mean, it was just inexcusable. It was a sad day for video games, Anthony. Sad day for video games.
Well, thank you for breaking that all down. That lines up with a little bit of Wikipedia reading that I did. Now, there was because I know I'm trying to remember. I think I played was it a version of that same game for Game Boy?
So usually what would happen, especially in those eras, a game would come out either for whatever the main current console was at that time for, let's just say, Nintendo, right? If it was the NES, the Super NES, or even to the 64, the Game Boy would usually get a counterpart version of that game,
Okay.
which, again, results will vary between, you know, Game Boy was a revolutionary one-of-a-kind system, but a lot of times if that care was not put into a Nintendo 64 game, the same lack of care was put into a Game Boy game, it would be disastrous. Again, Game Boy is a wonderful system. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful games on there, but the results just varied. You couldn't get away with some of that stuff now on the grander scale as what was happening in the 90s when we were kids.
Gotcha. Okay. Because yeah, I did. Like I said, I did not make it to Nintendo 64, but I did have Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, and I do remember playing that Superman game that was based on the animated series. And yeah, I don't have particularly vivid memories, but I definitely don't have fond memories of it. Yeah, it's a real shame. Now, since you are such a big gamer, do you still have your old systems?
Anthony, as you know, I'm moving, as you can tell, because I'm coming to you from an empty room from my lawn chair. Everything's packed up for my move. I literally, on my nightstand next to my bed, had my Game Boy Advance still. So not only am I have my PS5, my Xbox Series S, my Nintendo Switch, but I also do still have my Game Boy Advance, which was, I mean, that system is just a joy. I'm a big Game Boy fan in general. What was cool about the Game Boy Advance is it was really able to emulate those kind of Super Nintendo games for the first time. But you could take them anywhere, so you could get some really cool experiences. So yeah, I'm definitely not like a collector per se, but if I have a system, I hold on to it. I also still have my Nintendo 64. Which is actually, ties that together nicely as well. So if I really am keen on a system, I'll hold on to it.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. So one of the other things that has been on my mind, especially since, and it's funny how the timing of this worked out, in addition to rewatching Superman the Animated Series, I have also now started my rewatch of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. And quick plug, the first episode of my rewatch podcast with my wife is available right now on my Patreon page. So I hope that everyone goes and checks that out.
Go.
You know, and I don't know how familiar you are with Lois and Clark and the pilot in particular, but the ending scene from that pilot between Superman and Lex tracks very closely with the ending scene between Superman and Lex from The Last Son of Krypton Part 3. And, you know, that's one of the things that over the course of doing this podcast, you know, has really been fascinating, is to see the way that these various incarnations, you know, inform and feed off of one another. And, you know, the Lex, you know, Superman scene in particular, that's one real crystal clear instance where I have to imagine Bruce Timm and company took some measure of inspiration. Are you familiar with the scene that I'm talking about from Lois and Clark?
Yes, because while I'll admit I have not watched anything past the pilot because my life got very busy, but you implored me, as did just my coworkers, my friends, everybody watch Lois and Clark. I watched the pilot, and like so many of us were just I loved it. I mean, I thought it was I thought it was Superman and Lois rather. I thought it was fantastic. But yeah, I it's interesting, right? Because it's kind of like what we talked about last episode. You want to honor what came before and take influences from, but you don't want to kind of rehash and make a direct copy. So I think kind of finding that middle ground, that compromise between the two, you do get these callbacks where if you are a lifelong fan or you have consumed other media, you could be, oh, okay, I know where this is a direct reference to. And if you haven't seen it, you're still getting a cool moment. So I think
Yeah.
it kind of works both ways.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, because we might be talking about two different shows. I was referring to the Lois from the 90s, right? The Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of
Oh,
Superman.
you're talking about the one I don't like. I thought I thought immediately you wouldn't bring that up to me, but yes, that's fair enough. Yeah. I did. I watched some of that because I was forced to by you for our comparing the Superman origins, which was a tremendous project that I'm still really proud of that we did together. Yeah, I did. It was a cool. My feelings about that and in good natured jests aside about that show that I like to throw out, I did, yes, and my point still stands. I think with that as well too. If you can do a nice shout out, especially with a mainstream show, and that's one of the most mainstream Superman shows there's ever been. I mean, I think that's, regardless of my feelings of quality or anything like that, I won't argue that point. I think it's really cool that you can do something like that. And again, if you're a lifelong fan and are familiar with other material, you could be, oh, that's kind of cool. And if not, you still get, an interesting moment that's happening.
Yeah, I will say I have to give the edge to Lois and Clark for the Superman Lex interaction for one line in particular, because earlier on in the Lois and Clark pilot, when Clark meets Lex, Lex talks about how he likes being in the tallest building in Metropolis because if anyone wants to find him or see him, they have to look up. And so we get a nice payoff to that line when Superman pays a visit, and as he's flying away, says to Lex, if you want to find me, just look up. So I really, really like that. Obviously, the animated series took a different approach where we have Superman just stoically floating and not taking any of Luthor's bait. And the only thing he says is like, I'll be watching you as he flies off. So very equally effective, just in very different ways. But I guess that takes us to the first episode in our homework for this installment of the mixtapes.
Sadly, Lex Luthor, to my knowledge, in the animated series, though, never pays somebody to have snakes attack him. Right? That's not a thing that happens.
No, I don't think that ever made it in.
Oof. Anyway, pressing on.
But so I have I don't think I've really announced this yet, but I am planning a fairly deep dive multi-episode look at Lex later on this year, probably over the summer. And it'll be a look at the character across time and media, just as we do with Superman, but really, really focusing on Lex, because I guess the thing that I'm fascinated by and what sort of my big picture question will be for myself and for my guests when we get into it is, has to do with Lex's motivation, because it changed, like the character changes a lot, right? We have the mad scientist and then the evil businessman and all of that, but I feel like the motivations change as well. And the reasons for the antagonism towards Superman change. And again, I'll be getting into this a lot more, but it's one thing if, Superman's just kind of in his way. It's another thing if, there's that element of jealousy, that Lex has been in the favored position in the city and now he's lost that. I feel like in recent years, we've gotten into more of a philosophical, ideological motivation behind it about the nature of power and all of that. So that's so interesting to me. But I guess kind of on that note, the Last Son of Krypton Part 3, we talked about parts 1 and 2 in our last episode. Part 3, now we're full-fledged in Metropolis. Clark makes his debut as Superman. He fights John Corbin, who will go on to become Metallo in the Luthor war suit. And notably, Superman meets both Lois and Lex, in the series premiere, and their reactions to him, I guess, tap into like one of the most fundamental elements of the character and the mythology. When Superman explains to Lois, like, I'm, from another planet, like, and I'm here to help, and Lois is like, well, you sound too good to be true. Mm-hmm. And then Lex too. I mean, Lex, I think, is just confounded by the fact that, he can't buy or intimidate Superman, that Superman really is just here to use his power for good, not for personal gain, but just to help. And, look, this has come up so many times on the show, and it will continue to come up because I think it is really the ultimate core of who Superman is, the fact that he has the powers of a god and he just chooses to use them as a friend. And I thought that, in this animated series very early on, like right off the bat, especially with those two characters, I thought that was represented really nicely.
It was. It sets the table. I didn't love this episode. I felt like, and this is going to almost sound hypocritical because I talked about how much I enjoyed the Krypton pieces from this show. And that's something I'd seen before and we've experienced before countless times as well. But I thought that this episode was just a little more by the numbers in terms of like an introduction to Lex and to Clark and to everything. I thought it was fine. I think the most interesting part, at least for me, is that we see John Corbin right from the beginning, and right from the beginning, they're planting those seeds that are going to last through the entire run of the show, which again is just, I feel like there's a bingo board every time I shout out the Timm verse storytelling, or everybody takes a shot as soon as I mention that. Don't do that, really. But it's great long form storytelling. That impressed me. Everything else was kind of by the numbers. Lex in this show, the more episodes that we watch, the more I like Lex. And we'll get into that with one of these episodes here, actually, that we're going to talk about a little down the road. But I thought it was, I didn't dislike it. I thought it was completely fine, but we've seen this scene before. I feel like it's something I haven't seen before, and not everything has to astonish me and be a home run. They set the table. It was fine. And that's totally fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. One of the things that I definitely noticed more now than I did when I was a kid, and that I really do appreciate, and I think was a great choice for the entire series, was depowering Superman. I mean, you do, not unlike the Fleischer cartoons, again, another parallel between the two, but when Superman's stopping the plane, the crash landing with the plane, and fighting Corbin in the war suit, I mean, you see him, and throughout the series as well, you see him struggle. And I think
he gets beat up a lot, is a thought I keep having as we watch this. Yeah.
Yeah. But, it's one of those things. Look, again, and I reject this criticism, but I know for a lot of detractors of Superman, it's, he's too powerful, he's boring, it's hard to come up with, threats. But I think if you take his powers down like a little bit, he's still plenty powerful. Yeah. And last time we talked about his space suit and the ship that he needs to travel in space. That's another, departure from a lot of the comics where he's able to, even if he's holding his breath for an exceptionally long time, he's okay. It's like, I thought that worked really well. And I feel like, especially when you're dealing with episodic television, movies, I think you can kind of get away with kind of a larger power set for a higher power set for him, because, it's not as much not as much narrative space to fill. But it's like if you're talking about weekly adventures, you need things that'll be able to challenge him. And I think that it also, I feel like it pulls you in, like you're rooting for him. It's like as he's struggling to hold up the rails to keep the train from derailing, or like whatever it might be. I like that choice a lot.
It's almost like it was clever and very well planned to have a strong reoccurring villain with his weakness built into his chest, which we'll get to, which I think is one of the other reasons why I just love that character so much. But yeah, I agree. And again, I think Superman's also at his best when he's dealing with things that are as bad or not worse than him receiving physical injury, and that's the people he cares about being in danger, right? That's why point A, why I think that Superman's too strong, he's too powerful, doesn't work. That's point A, right? I mean, we're not kids banging the toys together in the sandbox. There's empathy and stakes involved where Lois or Jimmy getting hurt would hurt Superman worse than I think any physical pain that he could go through. And I think that's just from a storytelling perspective, that's 101. But also, yeah, it is. You do want to see him not be unstoppable. We want our Superman to be stoppable because guess what? We're all very stoppable. And I think if you just turn his power set down a notch, it makes him even more relatable in a way. I mean, he does get beaten a lot. He gets beaten up a lot in this show for a variety of different reasons. But I say that, and it sounds like a negative, but it's a positive, I think, really, because like you said, you want to root for him. You want him to be up against the ropes once in a while, to have that comeback. Everybody loves a comeback and a struggle.
Up against the ropes, you bring in a boxing metaphor, and I'm really like, I think that has a lot to do with why I like that. And also, it shouldn't just be that, he has to be fighting, Zod or Doomsday or Darkseid, to have a tough time physically, and so I think by scaling the powers back a little bit, putting him up against Metallo or Parasite, it's like, okay, like you're really putting him through his paces now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it ups the stakes, and I think it pulls you in, and you're really rooting for him in a more like visceral way than you might otherwise. So yeah, I thought that was a great choice. And I mean, look, I'm sure if you're the writers and producers of the show, it's like you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to sustain however many episodes this thing is going to go for? How can we challenge the character? And I think that's one way that. And also was not without precedent. I mean, I think Timm really, not just the Fleischer, but just the early, the golden age origins of the character. I think it was really kind of hearkening back to that. And kind of on that note, not just parallels to Fleischer, but the George Reeves Superman show as well, particularly in the depiction of Clark. And we'll talk about Clark more too, especially when we get to the late Mr. Kent. And also, please don't feel like we have to go episode by episode here. And I think there are plenty of instances where we can really kind of cut across multiple episodes. And I think that'll serve us really nicely. Yeah.
Yep.
But, one of the things that I loved about the George Reeves Adventures of Superman television series from the 1950s was that, that Clark was a tough, no nonsense reporter. Mm-hmm. He was not, the meek, mild, tripping over himself version of the character. And, what you get here is softer than the George Reeves version. And when I talk about George Reeves, I'm really talking in particular about those first two black and white seasons before they colorized it and started shooting it in color, I should say. And, made it even more kid friendly. But those first couple of seasons, like, were really packed a punch.
I think that's why probably we both like the late Mr. Kent so much as well too, and we'll get more into that. That thematically ties into that very much as well.
Yeah, but so this is very much a competent Clark, and again, we saw that in the comics of the '90s as well. So this was very much in keeping with that. There's one line though in particular. I think this was in part 2 of the Last Son of Krypton. Where Lois finds that Clark has beat her to Luthor's event where he's debuting the war suit. And she's like, how'd you get here? And he's like, oh, I just flew. I mean, that's something like right out of the George Reeves show, like that winky sort of comment.
Tongue firmly in cheek, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But so I like that a lot. I mean, it was cool, again, just to see how the show is kind of like weaving in, these different iterations of the character in effective ways, in ways that I think work really nicely. And so going back to Lex for a moment, I I have to say, this is probably one of truly my favorite versions of Lex. A lot has to do with Clancy Brown's
I was
performance.
just gonna say Clancy Brown. My goodness, what a voice and what an actor, for sure.
And I have more to say about Lex, but I want to toss it to you because, you are an actor, a performer, and I know you've done voice work. I guess my general question for you is, what are your thoughts, whether it's, Clancy Brown or Tim Daly or Dana Delany, like anything you want to say about the vocal performances, have at it. And specifically, what I kind of really wanted to pick your brain about was Lex and the Clark Superman dichotomy, and any things you kind of noticed in terms of how Tim Daly might have differentiated the two characters.
Sure. So I think I already said this in the last episode, but whenever I read a comic book, it's Tim Daly's voice that I hear when I see Superman. The same thing with Clancy Brown's Lex Luthor. Still to this day, he's just got such a unique voice and gravitas. And I think what it comes down to truly is that the writing is so incredibly strong, which is more than half the battle, right? But one of the things that I've come to experience, because I've done all sorts of different kinds of acting over this past, oh goodness, almost 20 plus years now, which is wild. But I always used to just say it's voice acting, it's voice acting. And plenty of professionals I know still call it voice acting. But I've come to realize that it's not, it's just acting. Right. And the fact of the matter is that they're putting in performances worthy of any medium. I think with all the nuances and gravitas that I would love to see some behind the scenes recording sessions in the booth, like with different notes, maybe and different interpretations of certain lines, and like what comes from them, what comes from a director. I mean, this is stuff that fascinates me. I would truly love to sit there and just see how that whole recording experience works. But they do such a good job. And I'm actually curious. I'm almost going to throw it back to you with this one, being such a huge Smallville fan as well too. Where in Smallville we have such a intrinsic link between Clark and Lex, right? Here in this show, we don't have that link, right? He shows up. He's already well established. I'm okay with it because I think Brainiac fills some of that void that would be there otherwise, of having somebody who's responsible from the beginning for a lot of what's happening, who he's tied to with his family, even if it's not his Smallville family, it's his Kryptonian family. So that to me kind of fills that gap a little bit for the stakes, which is why I really think, I think Brainiac is his main adversary in this show. I know with Darkseid and Lex and everybody else out there, that's definitely an arguable point, but one that I'm still happy to make, certainly. I'm perfectly fine with it. But I think also, now that I reflect back on it, maybe that's why this Lex didn't grab me right away as well, too, right? Because he shows up. I've seen it before. He's rich. He's showing a military show. Oh, look, I'm going to help Metropolis. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just greedy. I like, as the show goes on, the instances when they're forced to work together begrudgingly. That's when I find that their dynamic in this show is the strongest. And we certainly see that in Target,
Yeah.
right? And we see that. I love that. And I love that whole line with Lois even being like, no, you know what? Like, it's weird what's happening to me, but it's not Lex's style, and I believe him. And Lex is, and I'm jumping ahead in the episodes here, excuse me, but Lex is the one who ends up calling Clark and being like, hey, listen, in his own rude way, of course, like, I did follow up. I found the information. And Lex, in his own way, kind of ends up teaming up with Clark and saving the day, right? Even though he's not physically there. But if that phone call doesn't come in, everything goes differently. So I like that begrudging, we have to work together for Metropolis and for the greater good, because that's the only thing I think they have in common now without that Smallville background tied in, right? The only thing that they have for common ground is that they both love in very different ways, I think, and to various degrees of healthy and unhealthy, but they both love Metropolis. And that's what I think they're at their most interesting. But how did you feel about it? Being such a big Smallville fan, having their history so entwined and having that separate here.
So that's a big question, and one that I've not really come to a firm conclusion on yet, because I guess I see, not to sit on the fence, but I see value in both incarnations. I mean, as you and the audience knows, Smallville was so formative for me. I mean, I did not grow up reading pre-crisis Superman, but in those stories, he had this whole past with Superboy. He blamed Superboy for his baldness, and they had this whole antagonism from, their days in Smallville that carried over. Smallville, the TV show, of course, put a more realistic, adult, real-world spin on all of it. And since that was so formative for me, I think there is a part of me that is kind of always looking for that. But at the same time, I mean, I did grow up reading the Triangle era Superman books where they didn't have that backstory. So, I guess I can appreciate both versions of it. I will say that I'm certainly not opposed to them having a shared past. And, I think, we talk about Smallville a lot, of course, on the show, but I think one of the things that the show did really well, for as many things as there were frustrating about it as a fan, one of the things that it really did well was Lex's journey. And the fact that there wasn't one thing. I mean, I guess if you really had to boil it down to one thing, was the lack of trust. Clark didn't trust Lex with his secret, but there were so many things. Yes, they fought over Lana, but it wasn't just that. There were so many things along the way. The favor that Lana Luthor showed Clark that he didn't show Lex. I think it really did a great job of showing how they end up on opposite sides, and it wasn't just any one thing. It was complicated. So I think if we're able to get something kind of like that, then I'm really on board. Short of that, though, I don't necessarily need it. And again, looking at something like this in the animated series, I thought it played really well. I think, the vocal performance really, really goes a long way. But just this iteration of Lex who owns the city, and there's nothing and no one that he can't control or get access to except Superman, and can't quite figure out why he can't buy this guy or scare him off. And so I think it works. I mean, I think it's a believable dynamic. Now, this version of Lex, like I said, is one of my favorites, and I would put him, when we're talking the evil businessman version of Lex, I put this one above the Byrne era comics. I think, and again, this does go back to the voice, but the physicality, the charm, and the menace, that combination all swirling together of this Lex, I don't feel like you quite have that in the comics. I mean, that was a schlubbier Lex, I guess, for lack of a better description. And like I said, the menace, I suppose, was there in the comics, but the charm, which, not that you see a ton of from the Clancy brand, but you see it enough where it's like you could understand why he has the city, in the palm of his hand at the beginning.
Yeah, he wooed Lana, right?
Yeah, we got to talk about that.
Yeah, so
he's
a charming son of a gun. Look at that.
Yeah, so it's like, I think it's that combination in terms of the visual representation, of course, the writing and the performance, all of that. Again, that physicality, the charm, and the menace, that balance. I think really made this very effective. But I had the same thought watching The Target, right, where Lois is targeted by this unknown assailant who turns out to be a former Luthor Corp employee, and he would go on to become the villain Luminous in other episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually has, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Justice League episodes down the road, Daydream, he pops up again too, which is, again, that long-form storytelling, check your bingo boards, but that long-form storytelling, which is so cool. So yeah. I thought that was kind of neat to kind of look forward and see, they're still using them. They bring them back around.
Yeah, but I had the same thought you did when Lois suspects Lex, and why wouldn't she?
Sure, first person you go to, yeah.
And he says, like, no, it's not. I mean, and I'm paraphrasing it, but basically, like, if I wanted to kill you, like, you'd be dead. I don't know if it was even quite that, but it's like she believes him, but like you as the audience, like you believe him. It's like, no, that's not. He wouldn't do that, or he wouldn't do it in that way, at least. And like you said, he does deliver the critical piece of information to Clark, and. I'm with you. I mean, one of my absolute favorite dynamics, whether it's comics or other media, is when Superman and Lex or Clark and Lex are forced to work together. One of my favorite episodes of Smallville is Nemesis from season 6. And at this point, Clark and Lex are not friends anymore, but they get trapped underground in a cave-in, and there's kryptonite. So Clark can't get out. And these former friends have to work together. And it's one of my favorite episodes. I love that. During Final Night, the 90s, comics event, when the sun goes out, Lex, it's, when you can put them in that situation, a big Cobra Kai fan, and we just watched season 4.
I have to catch up. I've only seen the first 3 seasons, but that is the surprise show of the decade. It's what a joy that show is.
Yeah, but it's kind of like shades of that. It's like Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence, and you put them together, and they have to work together.
If Clark worked at a car dealership, instead of the Daily Planet.
Yeah. And you mentioned Lana Lang. Let's talk about that episode, My Girl, where we meet an adult Lana Lang. She's a successful fashion designer. She's in Metropolis to debut her new line, and she's on the arm of Lex Luthor. And I'm jumping ahead in the episode, but, later on, he sees via binoculars Lana kissing Superman, and I felt for Lex.
Yeah,
I actually felt for Lex.
Because who's going to be able to compete with Superman? Right?
Yeah.
You feel for Lex. It's that one moment where he is just a human, an exceptional human being, and despicable in other ways, of course, but an exceptional human being. But yeah, you do feel for him, and then she shows up the next morning and has breakfast with him like nothing ever happened. It's like, why are you doing my boy Lex like that? Like, come on. It's just, do him dirty like that? Poor Lex.
What?
And poor Mercy's still hanging out there, never getting any love or attention, watching the whole thing happen. She's like low key one of my sympathetic favorites now, like we talked about last episode. Just watching from the sidelines. Poor Mercy.
I know, poor. Yeah, 100%. What was your take on that depiction of Lana Lang and again, they don't delve too deeply into it, but the fact that there's a romantic entanglement between Lana and Lex. What were your thoughts on those two pieces?
I did not like the characterization of Lana. I thought it was too much. It almost seemed like it was almost I don't want to say it's not true to the character, because that's completely adaptable. It's whatever the writer wants the character to be, right? But we had no prior. And this is actually kind of tying into what we talked about before, right? Without Smallville, without seeing even more at length. We saw a little bit of young Lana there, in the beginning, but without more time there, it was just like, Lana's just kind of a jerk. When you first meet her, it's like, why would Clark ever be involved with this person? And I understand it was a long time ago when they were kids. I think we get a little bit of redemption for that towards the end of that episode and in the late Mr. Kent, where she does that kind of, I love that, our surprise save, which is super cool. But so I didn't really like her characterization in the early goings. However, as a plot point and setting up kind of that triangle, I thought it was great because it was another way for Lex and Clark to butt heads, where it was almost an even more even playing field, if not tilting the advantage to Lex, right? Because even though she knows that he's Superman, objectively, if you're on the street and you see Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Lex Luthor, right? So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to kind of almost flip that power dynamic a little bit for the general public and in this kind of situation. It also makes me wonder if the whole time, Lana, obviously very shrewd, very intelligent, very cunning, was this all just to get Clark's attention from the beginning? I think that's completely a plausible theory to be thrown out there.
I think there's something to be said for that. I can't say I was necessarily put off by this depiction of Lana, but it was definitely, as a kid, and again now, it definitely took me by surprise. I mean, it is divergent from, I think, fair to say, basically any other depiction of Lana. I mean, in the Bronze Age, in the comics, they had her working in Metropolis at GBS, as a reporter. I guess that would be the closest comparison. But, in virtually all other instances, I mean, she's the hometown girl. And what I thought was like so funny about this was that, typically when you have that juxtaposition between Lois and Lana, Lois is the city girl, right? She's the,
yes.
She's got the career and she's a little bit, harsher and like rough around the edges and just kind of has that more worldly feel to her. And then Clark and then Lana is, the sweet girl next door from the hometown. This version of Lana like really inverts that, where Lois seems like pretty tame by comparison. It was kind of wild to see that flip.
I love that point so much, because I think you even put into words something that I was still feeling and couldn't formulate my full expression on, because that's exactly it, right? Because there's two sides to Clark, right?
Yeah.
Kal-El and Clark and Superman, however you want to look at it. And it's so important to have that, because you also really get a sense of gravitas, right? Because Lana is such a powerful what if, and this is going to sound like a cheap little Marvel joke on a DC centric podcast, but I promise you it's not. But some of the best comic book stories and some of the best storytelling in general, whether it is books, whether it is movies, whether it's television shows, deals with what if, right? And what could have been. And Lana is that in most scenarios, and we talked about that previously in our Origins podcast, how you and I both have a very big soft spot for Lana as well too. It's because he had to make a conscious choice there. In Clark's mind, I would imagine, as in the mind of all of us readers and viewers, there is a universe and a world where he stays in Smallville and he gets married to Lana. But the fact that we don't have that is so powerful, because he had to leave that life behind, because Superman belongs to the world, right? Not
Hmm.
just Smallville. He's the world's champion. We all need him, not just Smallville. So that sacrifice and that what if kind of gives such a big gravitas. And I just can't imagine how that decision would be as impactful if Lana was just walking around like a kind of abrasive, corrosive fashion designer. Like, it just doesn't click in that way that maybe you and I and many others are used to.
Yeah, it's this is a tough one. I've wrestled with this, with the way the cartoon handles Lana, because a lot of incarnations I feel don't really do justice to the character. Like I feel a lot of times, especially in the comics, and I've just come off this huge reading project last year with the early Triangle era, and she was pining for Clark, like he was the girl she left behind, and she ultimately settles
Yeah.
effectively for Pete Ross, and
Yeah.
there always seems to be this sense of longing, and so I don't need that or want that for the character. That's why I love Superman and Lois, the current TV show, because they, at least as of yet, have not taken that approach to the character, but she does still represent Smallville in many ways. And
Yep.
that's the piece of this. Like the fact that she's a successful career woman, like that's awesome. But
Sure.
you're really removing her so fully from the world of Smallville and presenting her in this light. Yeah, I do think you lose something. And I'm with you. It's like I like that idea of her representing this path that he didn't take. I mean, staying within the world of Bruce Timm, when we get to the Justice League Unlimited episode, the adaptation of For the Man Who Has Everything,
Oh
right?
boy, that might be my favorite episode of Justice League. Uh, Full stop. And what a beautiful episode, based on a great, loosely based on a great comic as well too. Don't get me wrong, but yeah,
Yeah.
tremendous episode.
But it's like he's living on Krypton, and the woman he's with is this amalgam of
Yes,
Lois and Lana. And I don't
perfect.
I don't know that fully tracks with the version of Lana they gave us in Superman the animated
Right,
series.
right. That's it. It clashes so much for me when, especially when you put it in that lens. It's almost like they dialed it back and were like, well, you know, they it was a good choice. Again, that episode For the Man Who Has Everything is just what a tremendous Superman story, and just a great story in general. But yeah, I agree. It's just such a swift departure, and I think it does get better as the series goes on a little bit with her. But yeah, it just was a very, very stark and surprising, jarring is the word I would use when she first shows up. And just like, that's Lana,
Yeah.
strutting in on Lex's arm, and the way she talks to her other like the models and everything as well too, just very, very frank and dismissive, and mean almost at times, right? It was very jarring.
I mean, again, I can't speak for the writers. I don't know exactly what the motivation was, but I would imagine that, especially since we had Jonathan and Martha alive, and not in every episode presence on the show, but regular enough, maybe they felt that dynamic of the hometown was sufficiently represented, and they wanted to do something else with Lana. Like maybe there wouldn't have been, actually, in fairness, I mean, maybe there wouldn't have been as much of a role for her at all had they not done this. And look, it's a surprise. It's definitely a reversal of what you expect Lana
Sure,
Lang to be
sure.
like. So I'll give them that. The relationship with Lex, it's funny. And audience, if you can correct me on this, please feel free to. But, to my knowledge, other than Smallville, of course, where Lex and Lana would get married, uh, I, I'm not aware of any other instance where we've had a romantic pairing of those two characters. And like going back to what I was saying before of the way that these, depictions sort of feed off of each other, I can't help but wonder, Superman the Animated Series came just a few years before Smallville. I wonder, I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a stretch to say this one episode, inspired what they would do on Smallville. But, I can't help but wonder if there was some inspiration taken by this pretty unlikely and largely unprecedented pairing between the two characters.
If I was a betting man, I would say there would almost have to be, right? Because there's no way that you're writing for Smallville and not being a big time Superman fan. I mean, that's one of the things that makes that show so wonderful is that there's an obvious love there that comes from behind the scenes, right? That show is handled with such love and care and interest and honor to the history and what came before. And I really honestly believe there had to have been some intentionality in that. Especially it really is just a few years removed from the start of it. When did Smallville debut? 2000, 2001?
2001, yeah.
There you go. So only a few years removed. So I really would be willing to bet that there was some intentionality in those choices.
Yeah. I will say I did very much enjoy the fact that Lana instantly knew that Superman was actually Clark, and
I did like that. Yeah,
the fact that he was surprised that it was like it was hilarious to me. It's like of course she knows that it's you. So but I like that. That was a nice a nice and fitting touch, I felt.
It was, and it makes sense, I guess, if you think about it too, because it might fool people who haven't known him for the majority of his life and spent so much time with him. But when you spend that much time with somebody, you're going to recognize them pretty easily. So again, that was good logical storytelling. I thought it made perfect sense.
And like we said, Lana comes back. She makes a little cameo towards the end of the late Mr.
Yes,
Kent. The late Mr. Kent. Is an episode that, again, it harkens back to the George Reeves show. There was an episode, I believe it was the first episode of season 2 of Adventures of Superman, where Clark is interviewing someone on death row and, comes to believe that he's actually innocent. And, again, uses his superpowers to discern this. So that's sort of, we have a very similar, jumping off point here. This episode, I feel, is remarkable in a few respects. It has a very noir vibe to it. We have Superman narrating it, which we talked about last time. To my knowledge, only happens a couple of times. It happened in the Absolute Power episode where he meets Jaxer and Mala again.
Yep.
And in this one. So we get that narration. We open on the funeral of who turns out to be Clark Kent, and then we kind of, peel back and learn how we got there. What were your impressions? Because I guess I kind of was going into this remembering that it made a big impression on me. So I was really dialed into this. But did this kind of take you by surprise, or did you have a similar experience? What was it like for you?
You remember, and our loyal listeners and viewers probably remember me asking repeatedly in our discussion for the Ruby Spears Superman, who is this for? Right? And this is that I meant completely negatively, right? When I said that. That same sentiment, though, completely inverted, flipped positive for this episode, where this is a Saturday morning cartoon show, and they gave us an adult worthy, just noir, pulpy, mystery, gritty whodunit. And I think it's going to be a very, very tough challenge to top this episode as we go forward, at least in kind of my personal lists and ranking that as I'm watching this, because this is an episode that taken by itself, you could show to anybody and it just tells a succinct, engaging, interesting story that has believable motives, interesting twists and turns. And it is that, who doesn't love a good whodunit mystery? And just that twist of that threat. Again, how do you put somebody like Superman in danger? Well, we can't kill Superman. You can kill Superman. We both know that. But you can't kill Superman, quote unquote. But we could kill Clark Kent. And what happens then? And that's, I think, such a great way to put such intense stakes, because now it's, of course, Clark Kent isn't actually dead, but he is, right? That part of him is going to be dead if he can't explain how he survived it. And that's just such a beautiful trap to put that character in.
I agree with all of that. For anyone who needs a refresher, again, the episode, early on gives us this, scene where Clark is interviewing a man on death row. And again, Clark comes to believe that he is telling the truth, that he didn't commit the murder that he's going to be executed for. And Clark performs some good old fashioned detective work as a reporter.
I love my Clark and my Superman showing off his brains. You know that he gets overlooked sometimes, but he's no slouch. This is a great episode for that.
He tracks down old digitized pizza receipts that prove that the criminal, the alleged murderer, was actually getting a pizza delivered at the time of the murder, and they were backed up on floppy disks.
That's it. Those newfangled computers, they cause everybody troubles. It's probably just a fad that's not going to stick around, So.
Yeah, it's, we talked last time, and I will probably say this in every episode that we do for this run. This is a very timeless show. I feel like it holds up so well. Once in a while, there's something that reminds you this was the 90s. And so here, Clark goes to the pizzeria, and the guy's like, no, the computer system only goes back a few years. Oh, we have backups, and they're on these floppy disks. And while Clark is, in the process of bringing this disk to the authorities, a car bomb goes off while he's driving. One of my absolute
this is in the Saturday morning cartoon show.
Show.
Wild. It's wild to me.
I mean, this episode features 2 state executions. I mean, it's crazy.
I knew we were going to get there, but yeah, there are 2 state executions in this children's cartoon show, quote unquote. I mean, that's how special this show is. It goes to show you they were just letting him get away with well, I said let him get away with murder, but that'd be too on the nose there, I think. But
that's the thing.
Something.
I mean, there are no, this isn't an episode about spectacle. I mean, it's really a very human story.
I can't imagine being a 5-year-old and watching this episode and being enthralled, right? That's kind of what impressed me about it, Like this, again, it can work on a lot of different levels, but this really was an episode where I feel like they were like, we're going to tell a good story, and we hope that our younger audience is going to rise up to meet it instead of just giving a little something for everybody. And I love that.
Well, very well said. And I mean, look, I wasn't 5, but I was like 10 when I was watching this for the first time. But I mean, I remember this made an impression, and I think it was that exact dynamic that you said of the audience kind of rising up to it. I mean, I am so grateful that they did an episode like this. I don't know that if you had a Saturday morning kid show now, you would be able to do an episode like this. So, and it's funny too. It's like, I mean, I guess I was 10. I guess I knew enough, but it's like I'm trying to remember. But it's like, what? How much did I even know about the death penalty? Or like anything involving that? Like, I don't know.
It's wild. It's completely wild.
But
I was talking to my good friend Will, who used to come in. We used to come together all the time to alternate realities, and I was talking about how we've been watching this and how it's awesome. It still holds up. And I talked to him about. I just mentioned that episode. He goes, "Oh yeah, that's the one where they were doing executions in jail." Right? And I was like, yes. And same thing. It made an impression on him. He knew right away, all these years later, what I was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. But one of my absolute favorite things about this episode is that, we get via narration as Clark is driving before the, bomb goes off. Why did he drive the evidence in? Why didn't he fly it in as Superman? And I love this scene for 2 reasons. One, I think it answers a question that the audience would have. It's like, because again, this episode only works if Clark is presumed dead.
Yeah.
And that only happens if he's taking this in as his civilian identity. So I like that it addresses that. But the other more fundamental reason is Clark says, like, I wanted this to be Clark's victory. And we come at this on the show time and time again, but it's important to me that the identity of Clark Kent has integrity, and that it's who he is, or at least part of who he is, that it's not this facade. It's not just a disguise that allows him to...
It's not a secret identity.
Right.
Yeah,
Like it's who he is. And the fact that he
yeah,
takes pride in his work as a reporter, he's a great reporter. I just, it was so great. But also sort of the tragedy of this. It's like, pride before the fall. I don't know. Like he had pride in himself as Clark, and it ended up causing him a lot of problems. But I love that touch. I love it. It
he
really
has
made
that
the
great.
episode.
Oh, for sure. And he has that great conversation with his parents as well too, right? Where he's like, if I'm not Clark Kent, he's like, I'm going to go out of my mind.
I'm glad you brought up
And
that scene.
I love that line. It's just in that quick little snapshot, like it kind of like, oh yeah, like I would just be if I were to be Superman all the time, I would just be so mentally burnt out, and I wouldn't have something to showcase my other abilities and something. Superman belongs to the world. Clark Kent is for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such an important. That's why I love that little scene so much.
Me too. Right before we get back to that scene, so we find out with this car bomb that Detective Bowman, who had been introduced in the Target episode,
Bowman.
and in that episode with Lois, you very quickly get the sense this guy's not on the up and up, a little shady, and ultimately we find out he was the ultimate murderer, and we'll figure all that out in a little bit, but he's the one behind this car bomb, and Clark's car goes into the water, and there's this, as we find out later, like semi-blind fisherman who sees the car go in, doesn't see anyone come out, so that really puts Clark in this tough spot. And
So lucky break with that fisherman in his eyesight.
yes, very much so. But
It's a lucky break.
when we go to the farm, I'm glad you brought up that scene because that was another standout from this episode, and there were a few things that really jumped out at me. One was exactly what you described, and I think that gets at, again, fundamental for me tenet of the character, that he can't just not be Clark. And you summed it up perfectly, but it was hilarious to me when Martha is getting the news about Clark, and she's so nonchalant about it. She's like, "Oh
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
the car bomb, okay." And they're like, "I don't think you understand. Like your
I
son
guess
is
I'm
dead."
still in shock. I must still be in shock. Sorry. That was pretty funny.
That I thought that was great. I love when Martha gets anything to do, but especially that.
Yeah.
Now, I will say it was. I don't know that this fully tracked for me. Jonathan, Pa Kent, was the one who says like, "Well, you just won't be Clark anymore."
Yeah.
And I mean, on the one hand, part of me is like, yeah, I guess that makes sense for Jonathan. Like he's kind of like nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes. Like okay, like it's okay, sort of thing. But I don't know. I feel like I
He
don't know
raised
that
Clark.
tracks for me. Yeah.
He raised Clark. Yeah, his son is Clark. So
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Like we're on the surface level, it might track, but yeah, like he is Clark. Superman is something else that he does as an obligation, but he's Clark. He's his son.
Yeah.
So I agree. It's kind of and I again, who knows? You could look at that one line in a million different ways and take it in a million different ways. I'm sure it was just to kind of get that line that I talked about that I loved so much about him going, crazy, not being Clark, kind of as a response. But yeah, I mean, you never see Jonathan Kent call his son Superman. Unless he was like faced with him in public, of course, or something like that. But when he's talking to him, he's Clark. It's his son. That's who he raised. Of course, he's Clark. Clark can't be dead. He's standing in front of him, no matter what he's wearing. That's his son.
Yeah. Ultimately, of course, it works out, and Superman is able to expose Bowman and return as Clark. And we talked about the role that Lana plays, but there was a great scene between Superman and Lois where Lois is upset over the apparent death of Clark, and expresses to Superman the respect that she had for Clark, even though she always gave him a hard time. And I thought that was nice. There are a couple of instances, including in a couple of the episodes that we're talking about now, where you get at least a hint of romance between Superman and Lois.
Sure.
Even that only goes so far. I mean, if there's one regret that I have about this show, and this I suspect as a result of it being a Saturday morning show for kids, as much as it was something that could be enjoyed by audiences of all ages, I wish that we could have gotten more development on the relationship side. And I know that new cartoon that you mentioned that's the track that it's planning to take. That's one thing I would have liked to have seen more of, if possible, on this show.
And I won't, ruin the ending or future episodes here, but we do get that. But it's a little too late. It's too little too late a little bit in that regard, you know? Like we do end up getting some of that, but I agree. There could have been more stretched out. So maybe some more like, will they, won't they? And again, I understand we're dealing with 20 minutes in an animated form here as well, but it does. It seems like that she's always attracted to Superman. But I did think it was at least I thought at least it was a nice choice instead of having Lois be like, "Oh, I never told Clark how I felt," and have that mean romantically.
Hmm.
I thought in many ways for somebody like Lois Lane, who is just such a gifted professional and is so driven, to say that I really respected him might be just a very small notch down from "I love you," right?
Yeah.
Not to give them an out, but I actually thought that was a nice choice as well because she's so professionally driven, and we see all the teasing and stuff. But they are intrinsically intertwined, and we always think of them as romantically entwined, and rightfully so. But we also forget that, like, very much that they're colleagues. And having respect for your colleagues is the highest honor, especially coming from somebody like Lois. So I thought that was still really nice to hear her say, I never told that. I really respected him. So I thought that was a nice touch.
I agree. And, again, keeping in mind what a lot of the inspiration for this show seemed to be, like the George Reeves show, you didn't have any of that. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting, not even with Clark and Lois, but even just Superman and Lois. At the end of the Target episode, she has that line to Superman. I think it's that episode where she says, it would be nice to see you sometime when, when
I'm
you're
not in
not, when you're
danger,
not
or yeah,
safe.
not
Yeah.
saving my life. Yeah.
Do you remember what his response was to that?
Someday.
So, right. So there was
He says
that.
someday, which is a nice line, knowing what we know,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's true. And then the Brave New Metropolis episode, the ending there when he, rescues her from the parallel
Yeah.
reality and she proposes dinner. And he says like, oh, getting kind of personal, and it's interesting because again, that kind of like takes me back to the George Reeves version of the character where it's like, he didn't even seem to consider it on that
Hmm.
show. And I almost like kind of get the same thing here. It's like, yes, he cares for her, but it's almost just one of those things. Like I have a higher call and like, this is just not something I'm
Yeah.
pursuing. It's just interesting.
Yeah. It is. And I think in many forms of the character and the characters, I should say, in the world, that Lois is such a big part of bringing him into that world and opening him up more. I mean, Lois is such a big part of his humanity. We always get his humanity from Smallville, and rightfully so. But I think Lois is kind of like that final piece, right? Because I'm sure that he would otherwise be completely just, I don't want to say content, because I don't think he'd obviously be content deep down in his heart of hearts. But he does feel such a tremendous obligation to the world, to the greater good. But Lois also reminds him that he also deserves to be happy, and it's
Lois
such an
is
important part of the character.
Lois is the key. And I think on that note, maybe it's time to talk about Brave New Metropolis.
Oh
So,
boy, yes.
I think this was one that I wasn't so much on my radar for this rewatch. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I got to this one. I was like, oh yeah, like, this was
Yeah.
a really good one. And, we begin with Professor Hamilton, tinkering away, trying to create a portal using Phantom Zone technology.
He's always tinkering away, Professor Hamilton. He's always locked in that lab tinkering away.
Good old Emil. And, so Lois gets sucked through this portal and she ends up in a version of Metropolis where Lois Lane died. Intergang targeted her. Superman was a split second too late. And in his despair, he became this authoritarian figure, teamed up with none other than Lex Luthor. They've instituted a curfew and all these other restrictions. And he's in a pretty badass black suit.
He does look pretty slick, I'm not gonna lie.
And then of course we go from there. A lot to say about this. I really appreciated that we did not spend any time with Emil and Jimmy and Superman figuring out the portal on our world. I like that we were just in the alternate reality, and then Superman shows up at the very end. We didn't need anything else. I like that. Like I said at the top, definitely shades of DC's Injustice, which I did a whole episode on the animated movie not too long ago. We talked about you being a big gamer. I take it you've played the Injustice game.
I sure have, and I think NetherRealm Studios should be sending royalties to all the good folks who worked on the show and the Timverse, because I mean, yeah, this had to have been the direct inspiration, right? I mean, granted, we don't get the Joker piece, we don't get all of that, but yeah, I mean, other than that, he's a split second too late to save Lois. He has this kind of dark control, which you know what. I'm going to be fair about this. Is what I'm being. When this episode came out, I really thought it was more impactful. Now I feel like we're at the point, especially with how big Injustice has been, where we've seen this tale of, okay, hear me out, Superman, but what if he's not so good anymore? It's like I'm over that. Personally, I'm over that. I've had my fill of that. I still think, that being said, that this is a fantastic episode. I really did enjoy it. They swung for the fences and tried something radically different, which was really, really cool. I think just how we talked about the influences the show had on Smallville, and very obviously also, influenced NetherRealm Studios and everybody who made Injustice, which would then go on to the comics and the animated shows and its own living, breathing media empire, which is great. I'm glad those exist. Don't get me wrong. But taken on its own merit, it's still a fantastic episode. I think it's cool that we get to see Jimmy Olsen have something different to do, and kind of how he's more hardened and is this kind of resourceful, because that's Jimmy Olsen's greatest skill and merit, right? Is that he's resourceful. And I will talk about that more, I'm sure, in a little bit with his episode. But that's why I love Jimmy Olsen, because Jimmy Olsen is, we all wish we were Superman, right? But in most cases, we're all Jimmy Olsen, right? And I love that he. It seems like a departure from his character, but not so much so that it's not understandable. We're in this world, like, he is still resourceful. He still cares about people, obviously, and he's using that as kind of forming this underground resistance that's going on. So I thought that was really cool. This episode did a good job, as so many of them do, in such a short amount of time, of world building and making the characters likable but also believable in their decisions and outcomes and choices that they're making.
I agree with you. And, as people heard when I did that Injustice episode, I mean, I've no surprise, I've never played the game, but I was not that taken with the animated adaptation for reasons we discussed. But let me say this. Generally speaking, I'm not all that interested in stories of these alt versions of Superman as an authoritarian figure. Like we talked about, what makes the character special, right, is that he has these powers and he chooses to use them to help. That's it. So when we kind of twist that and say, well, what if he used his power in this way? That's fine. And I understand the appeal of those stories, but they don't necessarily do much for me. However, when you look at, and I kind of would categorize this along with Injustice, but also Kingdom Come, stories of like what happens if Lois dies, if Lois is killed, in particular, where does the character go? And I actually, out of the three, now I'm going to do an episode on Kingdom Come a little bit later on the podcast this year.
Love Kingdom Come. We all love Kingdom Come.
We all love Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't read it probably since the 90s. So, I can't say, I remember every nuance of it. And, what I'm about to say now, my opinion might change when I revisit it and I do that next episode. So I don't know. But Injustice, Brave New Metropolis, Kingdom Come, what happens when Lois is killed? What does that do to Superman? I actually like Brave New Metropolis the best.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. So with Injustice, the idea that he just completely goes off the deep end.
That's my least favorite as well. That's my least favorite out of the three. Yeah.
And that's where the animated,
You're not giving Kal-El enough credit. That even with this tragedy, that would just, so that he wouldn't have the constitution and the moral compass, and other people wouldn't rally around him to be like, this is terrible, but it's going to be okay. I think that's one of my fundamental problems, right? You're not giving him enough credit to move on in some form or fashion.
And that exactly is where the animated movie lost me, because I felt like to a point I was like, okay, like I'm actually okay with him killing the Joker in this instance.
Yeah,
But
I think we all are. I mean, I get that. That part I get.
but then he quickly gets to the point where he's beyond redemption, and I felt like, okay, now you've kind of lost me. But this, I just feel like this is too far beyond my version of the character. Kingdom Come, for lack of a better phrase, maybe gives him too much credit. Like the idea that he, not that he's okay with Lois's death. I mean, he retreats, from public life and from superheroics until he's pulled back in. But I don't know. I mean, the Brave New Metropolis version to me kind of struck the right balance, because, and what's funny is the fact that he's kind of certainly tamer than Injustice, right? In Brave New Metropolis, might be a function of it being a kid's cartoon, but I think the effect is actually really great, because it's like he's strayed, but he can still get it back.
He's not completely unreasonable in Brave New Metropolis. Even when you first meet him and he's talking, he you can tell that like he does want things to be safe and that he is hurting and he's sad, but he's not completely unreasonable like what happens in Injustice, right?
Right. But it does twist him up in a way that I guess you don't necessarily get in Kingdom Come. And look, and I'm not knocking Kingdom Come. And, we got a sort of an adaptation of it in TV's Crisis on Infinite Earths with the Brandon Routh version of the character. And, same type of thing there. His Lois and all of his friends at the Daily Planet were killed, but he soldiered on, and he added the black to the shield, to his crest, to show that hope cuts through the darkness. It's uplifting. It's beautiful. But I don't know. I mean, I really think, like I said, this idea that Lois's death would twist him up, at least to an extent, and give us like what we got in Brave New Metropolis, but with the room for redemption. I think for me, that's kind of the sweet spot. And like I said, I definitely get if people really gravitate more towards that Kingdom Come iteration, the idea that no matter what, he will never break. I get that. But for me, I guess it's, and this has come up in other episodes too, but I guess the idea that Lois is like that line in the sand for him. Like there's nothing, like it's a category of one. And I guess John can now, if we're talking about, the current comics, or John and Jordan, if we're talking about Superman and Lois, like his kids. But that Lois is that the one thing that, like, if something happened to her, he's not just going to be able to absorb that. That to me maybe makes him, I don't know, weaker than the Kingdom Come iteration, I said, but it just makes it more believable and relatable for me.
And that's fair enough. And I like it. Again, I love this episode and I love this interpretation of it. I would still give the nod to Kingdom Come because in my perspective, he is broken in Kingdom Come, just not in an outwardly way where I guess I kind of relate for it because at times where I've been really hurt or really upset, what I do is I withdraw.
Yeah.
I withdraw, I go away. I like to be hurt in private instead of taking it out on the outside world. And I guess maybe that's why that struck a chord with me. However, you do make a very compelling argument. I think it does speak to the strength of this show. It really does. It speaks to the strength, and I would love an episode where we got to just bring it back, and did a quick check in on what that Brave New Metropolis looks like a little down the road.
Yeah, for sure. So your point is very well taken. And it's funny. I was laughing as you were saying it because it's like, I think, and maybe we all do this as Superman fans to some degree or another. I guess how do I put this? Impose some of my own standards or morality or whatever, as much as I feel like I am inspired by Superman, but I think sometimes in terms of what I'm looking for from Superman, I guess maybe I am sometimes looking for like how I would react. And it's like, if I were Superman and something happened to Lois, I'd lose my shit. I wouldn't just withdraw. And again, maybe that's not fair to put on the character, but I think to be honest, like that's probably where some of that comes from.
And that's what we all do though, right? As readers and viewers, that's what makes us attached to these characters because it's those universal relatable themes. Like we're not flying around. We don't come from an alien planet as far as I know. But we can relate to these themes. And of course, like that's what makes these stories so immersive is that it's not like when you're in which I have a lot of experience as well too as a teacher also too. It's not like when you're in school and they're like, okay, here's the writing prompt, like put yourself in this character's shoes. We're not actively doing that as intelligent adult readers and viewers, but we are subconsciously doing it, right? And that's what we're doing. And I think what you said is, you laugh, but I think that's 100% accurate. I think most of us are doing that, whether we know how to articulate it or not. It's human nature, and it's what makes us invested. If we were reading these stories and we couldn't either consciously or subconsciously strike those feelings and chords about, oh, what would I do in this situation, or how would I handle that situation, we wouldn't be as invested as we are to
Yeah.
this media. So there's a lot of truth in that. I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. I think, because this has come up so many times on the show. A lot of times I don't bring it up like I'm about to do right now, but, with Superman killing Zod, particularly in Man of Steel, but whether it's the John Byrne comics or Superman 2, he lets them fall to their deaths. Anyway,
Right.
I think, especially in Man of Steel, like I've defended that a lot. And I think in part because it's like, it's what I would have done in that. Like if I really were in that exact situation, again, I understand the objections that people have to it, but like I said, I think that might be where some of that comes from. But bringing this back to Brave New Metropolis, ultimately, of course, we find that, Lex, he's partners with Lex, but Lex has obviously taken things, beyond what Superman is aware of. And
Yep.
when he discovers this alternate universe Lois, he tries to have her killed. And, of course, Superman intervenes. And then that's enough to,
Sending
snap
poor
him out of it.
Mercy. Sending
Yeah.
poor Mercy to do the dirty work once again.
And again, it's like, this is not a Superman Beyond Redemption. Lois takes him to Jimmy and the other freedom fighters. And, if this were Injustice, he would have fried them all in 2 seconds. But,
Yeah, right.
here we cut away, but then later we find out like, no, this got through to him, and he, has now aligned with them, and he ends this episode on a better path. And, yeah, I liked it a lot. I really, and I liked the costume. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it
So,
was a good looking costume. Good looking costume for sure.
yeah, I was a fan of this one. You mentioned Jimmy, right? And of course, Jimmy has
Yes.
this role as the freedom fighter. I guess kind of on that note, maybe we can jump to the Superman's pal episode, and also kind of tie this in with Metallo and Kryptonite. I think these can all
Yeah.
kind of
All
merge
connected.
together.
Yeah.
One really quick thing that I just want to say before I forget, because it made me laugh when I thought of it. The Target episode in particular, uh, when Lois and Clark are driving in her car, and Luminous or Lightner takes over and we don't know it's him yet, but he takes over the radio, and he's taking control of the car, and Clark, like cuts himself out of the seatbelt, and he like tears open a hole in the roof of the car, and he's saying, and he ultimately gets thrown from the car. So we don't get to see how Clark would have saved them necessarily,
Right.
but it's just one of those things. I just felt for him. It's like, what a pain that must be to maintain your secret identity. I mean, generally it's like, all right, you got to keep up appearances, this and that. But like in a life or death situation, you have to
I
like go
would
that far
I
out of your way.
I would have blown my cover within seconds, Anthony. Seconds. I would have blown my cover. You're right, but that goes to show the kind of person he is, right?
Yeah.
He understands. He's just got okay. I just got to go fall now. Got to go fall till I'm out of view, and then change into Superman. It's and Clark deserved that moment. Let's give Clark a win there. Clark should have done something because Clark is resourceful. We do know him to be resourceful and capable in his own right. So he would have been able to make something happen there. I wish we would have gotten to see it. I agree with you.
Yeah. That would have been cool to see. But, you know, again, talking about Metallo and Jimmy and Kryptonite, uh, I know you've spoken about being a fan of Metallo generally, or a fan of the animated series version in particular, or both.
Oh, I don't know of anybody who's a fan of Metallo, like generally, and I mean that with all due respect. And he's not the most exciting character, but listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Andy McDowell, the voice actor who
Oh,
plays the
Malcolm
accomplished actor. Oh,
McDowell.
excuse me, Malcolm. Andy McDowell is an actress. That's Oh, is there a relation? Are they related?
I don't know. I don't, not that
We
I'm
should
aware
Google
of.
that actually. 'Cause that name pops up in my head in the 90s too. But yes, Malcolm McDowell, Malcolm McDowell, Malcolm McDowell. There, I evened it back out. Wow. What an actor. What a performance. Talk about a voice that stays in your head in the best way. That gravitas, that snark, but also that pain. I love this version of Metallo. I don't have a whole lot of other experience comic wise, either before or after. I believe the original version of Metallo was created in the 40s or 50s, and he was wearing like a almost like metallic outfit. I did a quick Google the other day, and I was like, oh, I wonder when Metallo was created. This was obviously a reimagining of it. I think it informed how he appears in later subsequent comic versions, and I have to check the timeline on that, of course, but. The acting, first and foremost, of Malcolm McDowell is what just such a home run for this character. But I love. You ever watch the show Black Mirror by any chance?
Oh yes, love Black Mirror.
Okay. So a lot of these episodes, and stick with me here because we're going into the weeds here and a little off road here, but I've been thinking about Black Mirror while watching Superman the animated series. And that is something I never thought I would say, but so many of these episodes have those kind of same themes and just interesting and tragic storytelling. Like the story of Metallo could be something out of a Black Mirror episode, right? A cautionary tale with technology, and it's such a great, and again, this Lex with the disease and setting him up is all despicable, but as far as he knows, he has this horrible disease, and this is, he's going to be able to cure and not only be cured but be better, quote unquote, than he's ever been. It's that old monkey's paw, be careful what you wish for. Now he can't taste, he can't feel a kiss, he can't taste food. When you first see him, he's eating all of the food like a glutton in his jail cell because Lex is still and his influence is still taking care of him. And it's just such beautiful storytelling, and it's just such tragic Black Mirror Twilight Zone esque, right? A story of unforeseen consequences that make that character awesome. Also, as a 90s kid, I'm just a sucker for that whole Terminator esque kind of vibe as well too. It's why I also kind of love Cyborg Superman, which is I think that look, it just, you're looking at something that should not be, but very much exists. And that just strikes such a primal chord, I think, in me. And I love the character. As I mentioned too much earlier in this episode, that the fact that he has kryptonite built into him, it makes him such an instant and immediate threat at all times, which is cool to kind of not even level that playing field, but as he does in this episode with Superman's pal, when he catches him off guard, I mean, it's a wrap. I mean, if it's not a level playing field at all, if you can catch him by surprise, and Mattel is a very smart man. I mean, certainly pained and driven to psychosis and immoral, but he's an intelligent person as well too. So it's just such an awesome threat for the character, and I love one of my favorite characters. I'd put him only behind Brainiac, I think, but to as far as my favorite villains from this show, and I know that might sound outrageous. But again, I really hope folks are watching these mixtapes along with us. But really, just when you hear the performance and the whole storyline in that context, it's just, again, a word we use a lot on our bingo board for this show is timeless, right? Uh, I think this is just such a great, tragic, timeless story they put together here.
I so appreciate your passion for for this iteration of Metallo. I don't know that I quite meet you with the same level of enthusiasm, but I'm close, and even more so after hearing you lay all of that out. It's funny because as a kid watching it, and then like I said last time, I rewatched it in like late high school or college. The Metallo episodes were some of my least favorites, and there's at least one Metallo episode that I didn't even put on any of our lists, the action figure episode. Uh, but upon rewatch, I've definitely come around on Metallo generally, but specifically this version, and the voice actor definitely goes a long way towards that. But I appreciated, like you said before, planting the seeds for this. Having Corbin be part of the
Love
series
that.
premiere and then bring him
Yeah.
back. It's reminiscent to me of an animated series that came later than this, The Spectacular Spider-Man. Did you watch that?
Not at any great length. I've seen every episode of the '90s run on Fox of the
Sure.
animated show. But I have now. help me out here. There is a version of the animated show where Neil Patrick Harris does the voice of Peter Parker. Is that the Spectacular Spider-Man or no?
No,
So
no.
which one is this? Which one is
So
this?
I know the one you're talking about. The Neil Patrick Harris one was like set in the continuity of the Sam Raimi movies and was like an MTV show.
Got it. Got it.
This was Greg Weisman, who did Gargoyles.
Oh, love gargoyles.
And this came out, I don't have the years offhand, but maybe like 2010 or like somewhere around there. Only ran 2 seasons. It is probably, and Spider-Man's my favorite Marvel character and one of my favorite comic characters in general. And this cartoon is like probably my favorite iteration of Spider-Man. And there are some people who are listening to this who are right there with me, and the others probably just haven't watched it yet. It's so good. And one of the things that I always loved about it was how it made full use of the vast Spider-Man supporting cast and would bring characters in and kind of, it would be a slow burn, right? Like they would not be at the forefront, but then they would come into play. They did such a masterful job of that. And that's kind of what the Corbin bit reminded me of. But what won me over more than anything else, and this was, I guess, what was kind of lost on me as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, exactly what you just said, this idea of not being able to feel, to smell, to taste. I guess like watching it the first time, I didn't think about what that would be like. But I did now, and it's like the tragedy of it, and then compounded by the fact that Lex, like you said, was responsible for his affliction in the first place, motivated him to undergo this procedure. I mean, it's it really is tragic. And then, like we said before, this is a character who generally, but even more so with a depowered Superman, is able to go toe to toe with that kryptonite. So I really did come around on Metallo, and the reason I even had The Way of All Flesh on this list is for Lex's role in that, but it's a great spotlight on John Corbin. I wish that the description for Superman's pal did not mention Metallo, because otherwise I think it would have been a cool little surprise that he pops up in that episode.
Tina in the beginning of the episode. I just like metal. Some nice foreshadowing happening there, right at the very beginning. I agree. I would have been a much nicer surprise. But even the title of the episode, what a nice callback that is, huh? The Superman's pal. I thought that, talk about honoring what came before. Even just titling the episode that, I thought was a very nice touch.
Yeah. Now, I know I just sang the praises of Metallo. I guess, you know what though? I was going to go in a negative direction. I'm going to spin it back to a positive. I actually like the way Metallo is used in Superman's pal is fitting. Like, I think one of the problems I have with Metallo and maybe some of the lesser Superman villains is that, once you tell their introductory story and you kind of get the gist of the character, you kind of play that card. Some characters are very rich and you can keep going back to and you do different things with, or a different spin on the same thing. And others, it's sort of like, okay, been there, done that. And it might be hard to really like build a whole episode around Metallo. I know you feel differently. Are you be fine with that?
No, but I appreciate the positivity here, especially when we turn this into the Metallo podcast. We'll call it heavy metal, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. We'll see.
But that's why, like, I think the way he's used in Superman's pal is perfect. Sure. And it's something that I've always said about the superhero movies. Like I know the Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield was not well received. I know that's changed a bit now after No Way Home. I think people have been reevaluating the Garfield movies, but I love the way they used Rhino in that movie.
Yes,
he doesn't need to. Paul Giamatti.
Oh, Giamatti, right. Crazy. I love that. And that genre. And also, I know you're not a gamer, but that directly also informed the incredible Spider-Man Insomniac Games PlayStation games too, because that version of the Rhino is the same thing. It's more of that mechanical mech suit, which is, again, cool to see how these bold choices do end up having ripples and effect going forward, which is cool. I like what you're saying. And I think you mean it because you liked it that they used Metallo more sparingly. Mm-hmm. Which I don't have a problem with, but I also like it because I think how you keep bringing Metallo back is, I agree. Once that initial horror, that body horror story that happens with Metallo, you bring him back because you show that he's also intelligent and cunning, right? That he is able to lurk in the shadows, formulate this plan, and then use his powers to strike. If he was just like a rhino, so to speak, rampaging through the town, you'd be like, okay, we can't do another whole episode about this. We've seen that. But if you can be like, okay, he is pretty cunning. Maybe not quite on a Lex Luthor level, but is obviously a very intelligent man who has a lot of hate in his kryptonite heart. And as long as you could do that and then bring him in to be like surprise, or put Superman in situations where he's going to be blindsided, because like I said, if he can blindside Superman and it's not a fair fight, at 10 out of 10 times it's going Metallo's way, right? And I think that's where the danger lies, not in a head-to-head confrontation, but if he can kind of pull the strings and then hit him when he least expect it, Superman's in some real trouble there.
Well said, and I think that's one of the advantages of this version of the character, because I'm not a Metallo expert, but this is a far more intelligent and cunning iteration of the character than you typically get. So I think there's room to do that with the animated series version. So yeah, I mean, I really came around on Metallo. I love the way he was used in Superman's pal. I love that Jimmy got the spotlight.
Yes.
Much that can be said about Jimmy. He's gone through, generally speaking, tends to fulfill the same role, the same function and the same dynamic, no matter what we're talking about, with some variation. But, I thought this was a pretty, classic, effective depiction of Jimmy Olsen on the series, as a whole. A minor nitpick, I could have done without the mullet look.
Keep the mullet. Every single Jimmy Olsen, make it an edict, DC. Every single version has to have the mullet now. It's funny because I was going to say that was of an era, but even like by the time the show was coming out, it was probably a little too late even for that, right?
That's
Right.
the thing. It's like, and I'm all for, and like Ken Marion I talked about before, and as an artist, like he and I have talked about this. I mean, he's all for, like really updating Jimmy with like tattoos and like an earring. Like there are all sorts of things you can do. So it's like, the mullet felt dated even then. I don't know. It's not my favorite visual representation of the character, but I like, again, the role that he serves. One of my favorite things in that episode is when, because Jimmy's interviewed on the news and they take his answers about his relationship with Superman like wildly out of context, and
it's that old Simpsons gag when they're interviewing Homer, and they I don't know if you're a Simpsons fan at all, but they cut the whole news case to make him sound absolutely horrible, and you can see the clocks moving at different times behind him, like as they're editing. It's just that tickled me very much when I saw that in this episode.
Exact. So, it creates this impression that he has this close relationship with Superman. And then of course that makes him a target of admiration, of people asking for favors, of enemies. There's this great moment where, Superman intervenes right in their talk, and he says to Jimmy, he's like, you gotta clear this up. But the Tim Daly delivery was great. It just felt, I don't know. Just like Clark felt like, or Superman felt like, I don't know, like a regular guy. The way he's like, you got to clear this up. Yeah. I like that. Small moment.
I get such a big brother vibe from their relationship in this show, which I think is just spot on, perfect. How my ideal envision of their relationship is kind of that big brother, little brother, kind of scenario. And I like Jimmy. Who doesn't like Jimmy Olsen? I mean, really, like I said, we all want to be Superman, but in reality, more often than not, we're Jimmy Olsen. Right? We have nothing but our resourcefulness. A lot of times we don't have good luck. Things don't go our way, but we rely on our friends who we think are super, even if they don't always know it, and they inspire us and they bring us up. And I think that's kind of the beauty of Jimmy Olsen. I love him as a supporting cast member, and they do a great job in this show as well. This was, I think, the funniest episode that I've seen so far. There are some parts that actually got some good chuckles. When he's in the park and the guy's talking about how he wants Superman to come to his birthday party. And he's like, a lesser man would be, put off by that. And just Jimmy starts just running away, and he's just in a full suit, just running next to him, still talking. That got a good little chuckle out of me. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it was a humorous one for sure. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, yes, I am a fan of Jimmy. And the little brother role, I think, is probably the most classic and most common version. I'm okay with them being more contemporaries and being more peers and friends, as opposed to like the big brother, little, like, I don't know that there's as much. I feel like you have a little bit more you can do when there's more of that like genuine friendship, and they're like, and Clark and Jimmy are buddies, as opposed to Jimmy being like the little brother always looking up to him sort of thing. But I don't dislike this. I don't know. in my ideal scenario, I don't know that I would necessarily pick this, but I like it, and I think it worked well. And this was a fun episode, and the fact that Jimmy's able to save him is a very nice touch.
We split the difference, and what you want it to start off like this and have them grow and evolve into contemporaries, right? Like that's the happy medium. That's what we want here, right? Because we want to see Jimmy Olsen just blossom and grow to heights where he is very much an equal, and maybe even some way Clark's better. You know how he's always helping Clark and Superman out of jams as well too. Again, using his resourcefulness, which is something that I admire about the character.
It's interesting you say that. Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's part of my hang up, where it's like, well, if I have to have him as the little brother, like the way any of these things work, it's like that's all he'll ever be. But in an ideal scenario, you would have that evolution. I mean, one of the instances where we sort of got the other end of that, I don't know if you watched it, but with the Supergirl TV show, where he was James, and he was a very accomplished photographer and went on to run Catco and all of that. Unfortunately, due to the fact that Superman appeared very sparingly on the Supergirl show, we got very little interaction between them. But, that's something that, like that dynamic, I would be cool to see more of.
Yeah, I agree.
I still want to talk a little more about Kryptonite, because, we talked about it, certainly as far as its role in creating Metallo. But as far as the supporting cast generally on this show, right, the main thrust of this episode that we're doing here, very classic. I mean, and again, going back to the George Reeves show or the movies, I mean, it's Perry. Perry unfortunately doesn't get a spotlight episode.
I was waiting. I thought that's what you were going with this, because I have one bone to pick based on our previous talks and previous episodes, and that's my bone to pick. Where's my good Perry White stuff? Where is my great Caesar's ghost? That is such a wonderful character that in these hands, I wish had that time to shine.
Yeah. Look, I'm always for more Perry White. This came up when Rich Roney and I did our Adventures of Superman episodes a while back. But in the Adventures of Superman TV show, it's a throwaway line in one episode, but they say that Perry was the former mayor of Metropolis. And to my knowledge, I don't know that that's ever been followed up on or played up on anywhere else. But like, there's a lot you can do with Perry White. He fulfills a very traditional, role of the gruff editor of the paper, but it certainly works. But again, not unlike a lot of the really classic incarnations of the mythology. It's Lois, it's Perry, it's Jimmy, Lex, the Kents, which again a very nice carryover from the 90s comics. The Kents are a presence there, and again very similar to Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, where he's on the phone with them or he's visiting them on the farm and he's getting that advice. Were there any supporting characters who didn't get any play or didn't get much play other than Perry that you would have liked to have seen or seen more of on the show?
We've already talked about it, but I would have loved to have seen more Lana. Maybe, maybe just not in. I wish there was some way to kind of bridge that gap from where we leave her very early on, and I believe it's the second episode, right? Last Son of Krypton Part 2, where we see her, to then seeing her in her present incarnation in Metropolis. I wish there was more that could have been done in between that. Like, maybe she comes to visit Clark, or maybe Clark does go back to Smallville. Maybe we did, and I'm talking to my target audience here with this one, but maybe we did need a little more Smallville here and there in this show to kind of bring some more of those other characters to life. We really don't see much or any of Pete Ross in the show, do we?
Just right? I think it's in the second episode where we spend time with Clark, right? Where he overhears, one of their classmates inviting Pete over, and Lana's like, "Oh, that tart." I think that was it as far as Pete.
Yeah, really. Which again, you can't have everybody, especially when they're essentially 20-minute episodes. I get that, but I would have liked to have seen some more storytelling and long form storytelling done with Lana. Is what I would like to have seen.
I would be with you on that. And to be honest, I feel like, I don't know. It's tough because the way they played it, it's a surprise to Clark and to the audience when she shows up as that fashion designer. Because there's some value to that. But what I was going to say is maybe there could have been an episode that came before where you see her leave Smallville to, embark on a new endeavor, and then you catch up with her down the line and she's accomplished all this stuff. Yeah, I think something like that would have been cool. I mean, look, like you said, any more time in Smallville, I would always
Yeah,
welcome.
that was a layup for you, I
Um,
know, but
Again, I don't know how much you need it on this show per se, but I certainly wouldn't, I wouldn't object to it. I'm trying to think. I mean, for what this show was, I mean, I think they used the characters that made sense in this world. I can't say I have like, a huge, I guess I'm trying to think here.
I got another one for you
I,
too.
oh, okay. You go first. Cause this is still percolating. So you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Yeah.
So you knew because based on our previous talks about kind of like the Superman origins and the early days, how much I like and enjoy Perry White. I would have loved to have seen another episode in the same vein or style of the late Mr. Kent, but focusing on kind of maybe Clark and Perry doing some like hard boiled detective investigating together. Maybe we
Yeah.
get a little bit into Perry's past. Maybe something, has popped up in Metropolis. And again, a great way to show the talents of Clark Kent and how he's even still learning how to use his mind and his investigative abilities from Perry, I think would have been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would have been really cool. I mean, I guess the characters who come to mind are the characters from the Triangle era of the comics that are so beloved to me. I mean, Sawyer and Turpin are here, and we're going to talk about them, especially when we get more into the
I
New
love
God stuff. So they're there. You
love
know,
Turpin.
I mean, there are other characters who I think maybe could have rounded out the Daily Planet bullpen a little bit, like a Ron Troop or a Cat Grant. I don't know how much you need them per se. And honestly, the Angela Chen character, I think, basically fulfilled the Cat Grant role more or less.
We never get any Cat Grant, do we?
I don't believe so. No.
Right, right.
Um, eh, you know, this this I guess the rest of my wish list probably would I should save for when we talk about the DCU team ups or the villains, but it would have been cool. They bring in John Henry Irons and he becomes Steel, and we'll talk about that in one
Yep.
of our upcoming episodes.
Love that.
As a fan of the 90s Superman and the Death and Return, like it would have been really cool to see them do Eradicator or Cyborg Superman or
Yes.
anything like
Yes.
that. I mean, we would eventually get Doomsday or version of Doomsday on Justice League Unlimited, but I guess if some of those elements from the comics that I grew up reading had been incorporated into the show, it would have been cool. It would have, I guess that would have dated it a little bit. I mean, I think they were really striving for, the classic incarnation, although they did bring in, they created new characters like Livewire. So, there was
Yeah.
a mix
Yeah.
there.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this with all due respect to one of your other prominent guests who is awesome and I know loves Lobo very, very, very much. If you look at the totality of the show, we spend a lot of time on Lobo. Like Lobo gets 2 episodes, right? I would have liked to have seen some more of that time spread out and maybe go to one of those other characters, is what I was thinking. Because if there's a character, we think of Timeless, right? I don't, if you're a kid from the 90s like we are, we all love, have some affinity, even how big or small be for the character of Lobo. I'm the same way because we grew up with that. But if you came before or became after, I'm willing to bet that you probably don't have that same affinity for Lobo, right? And I think if it's and there's no way to know this, right? This is me armchair quarterbacking. Hindsight is 2020. It's the biggest cliche in the world, but it's true. But I just you want so much of the show is timeless, and that time ended up being so precious because we only get 3 seasons. That when you see episodes that are maybe multi-part on a particular topic, a part of me is always like, but what if we just gave some of this time to this character or that character? So it's interesting to see how everything played out. I also thought it was interesting. Lobo makes the intro too from the very
Yeah.
beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was this is a very much a that's how it kind of gets this little '90s watermark on it to me, right? Because Lobo is always presented as this huge deal in the show. He gets top billing in the very first episode. He's in the intro, right? So I found that to be very interesting as well.
Yeah. No, very true.
With all
I'll be getting a message from Justin, I'm sure, after he listens to this.
Justin, I think you're awesome. I like listening to you. I think Lobo is great. He is the main man. Don't get me wrong, but I'm speaking. Trying to remove my bias as a '90s kid. I feel like if you weren't in that era, it might be. I mean, is there's not a Lobo ongoing now, is there?
No.
I know they did that one revamp where he was like very skinny and people were very, very unhappy about that a bunch of years ago. But other than that, it's just, I can't really think of anything else. Maybe it's time and the right creators to bring Lobo back. maybe it is time to do something like that. But it struck out to me or stuck out rather to me as something that wasn't as timeless as something as a lot of this other show ended up being.
Yeah. No, very true. I guess the last episode that we really haven't touched on much yet is A Little Piece of Home, which introduces kryptonite. It's in this museum exhibit, and Superman stumbles upon it when he's stopping a robbery, and Lex clocks this and uses it to in his mind, hopefully, keep Superman at bay. But of course, Superman, won't back down. And we get that battle with the robotic T-Rex from the opening sequence. And Lois is there to help him. Just like, Jimmy helps him later with Mcdowell, Lois is there to help him with that. Very nice.
Instantly reminded me of the Batman, the animated series too, right? Because I always think of the Batman, the Batcave in that show with the T-Rex in there as well too, and just seeing the T-Rex come to life in this. I don't know if that was an intentional nod or a subconscious nod, but it pinged something in my brain that I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I think I was, I don't know, it was IMDb trivia or something. I think there was an intention or, a thought on the part of the producers to tie that in somehow, but they didn't. Cool. But I think that was at least part of it. But again, just like with Brainiac, and of course this is true regardless of which telling of Superman we're talking about, but the tragedy that it's like this, remnant of the world he came from, the world he lost, is lethal to him. I always love the scene where, Lois has the little sliver of kryptonite and she shows it to Clark, and he, reacts to it, and she just thinks he's sick, and she orders him soup and meat.
They're in the diner.
Right, yeah. Right, very nice. Yeah. I always like that. But, and again, another classic Superman Lex scene, where, like Lex has something on him. And again, to kind of tie this all full circle, this version of Lex, because we've had versions of Lex where he's in the green war suit and they're fighting, and it's, he meets him on a physical level to some extent. But, here, what we got in the 90s in the comics and what we see represented here, I think is really fascinating because it challenges Superman in a different way. Even going back to the Last Son of Krypton Part 3, when Superman's hovering outside the window and Lex is like, I don't know how much you heard about my machinations with the war suit. He's like, but I know what you can prove, which is nothing. And even the Ruby Spears cartoon, the first episode ended that same way, where it's like, you have nothing on me that you can prove. And so it's just, challenging the character in a different way. Kryptonite adds a different layer to it, where it's like, now there is actually a physical barrier, which I don't know how do you feel about that? Does it work, or does it take something away from the ultimate dynamic?
My idealized and preferred version of Lex Luthor is when he's smart enough to know that he can't meet Superman on a physical level, and instead uses his gift in the arena where he is far superior to almost everybody on the planet, right? With his intelligence, his resources, and his commitment. That's the version of Lex that I like. I think there's a strong argument to be made that Kryptonite is an extension of that. And I'm okay with that, right? Because like he had to deduce and realize that this is affecting him this way. It's from Krypton. So that is kind of an extension of his intelligence. I prefer that over the war suit.
Yes.
Because I just don't understand like why he would put the war suit on instead of just running away and living to fight another day and just painstakingly make a new plan for when he least expected it. That's just my version. Every interpretation is valid, but that's just my preferred version of Lex.
Well, I like, what you said about it being an extension, and it's like with the ring, it's that extension of the idea that Superman can't touch him, and now it's more literal, but still really kind of plays into that. So yeah, I like that. I mean, by the end of this episode, Superman has all of the kryptonite. So again, obviously Lex will get his hands on it again, but. I guess my point is they didn't go in the direction of him with the kryptonite ring right off the bat, like we got in the comics and everything. But I know they do play with that later, right? Especially in Justice League. Am I remembering that right?
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Well, we've just about hit 2 hours, and we think we've covered all of the episodes that were on our list. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about Metropolis and the supporting cast before we part?
One of the greatest supporting casts in comic book history. It gets overshadowed, I think, by supporting cast of Batman, of Spider-Man. I think those are the two big immediate ones that comic book fans think of as like, wow. I think this is right up there with them. They might not be as flashy or as as splashy, but I think the supporting cast as fully rounded characters and believable characters that help not only create the world but inform who Clark is. I think there's you're not going to find better characters who do that in all of comic books or their adaptations.
Well said. Well, thank you for joining me for another one of these mixtapes. 2 down, 3 to go. We will be back in 1 week for part 3 or volume 3 of Superman the Animated Mixtapes. I hope you will join us in 1 week for that. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action.